Tonight we begin with something that will make your skin crawl every time you hear a dentist's drill. Imagine waking up in a world where pain relief doesn't exist, cavities are burned out with rocks, and the only thing sharper than your toothache is the tool about to fix it. We're diving into what it was really like to be the world's first dentist in the Stone Age. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Now dim the lights, maybe put on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Congratulations, you've just woken up in the year 10,000 BCE. The good news? You're alive. The bad news? Your mouth feels like it's been used as a tool to crack rocks. Because it has. You're a prehistoric human, and your diet is less balanced and more constant war with texture. Every meal is crunchy, chewy, or suspiciously gritty, and your teeth are paying the price. Your bed, if you can call it that, is a pile of animal hide stretched over cold earth. The air smells of smoke, sweat, and something vaguely like wet mammoth. You blink awake as the fire pit smoulders beside you, sending up thin ribbons of smoke that sting your eyes and cling to your skin. You sit up, scratch something you shouldn't, and realise your jaw feels like it's trying to detach itself from your face. Congratulations, you have your first cavity. There's no dentist to call, no soothing classical music in the waiting room. Just you, a few sharp stones, and the growing suspicion that your toothache might kill you before the saber-toothed cats do. By the way, this isn't fiction. Archaeologists have found fossilised skulls from over 13,000 years ago showing actual dental work. Tiny holes drilled into molars with flint tools spun by hand. These were the world's first fillings, done without anaesthesia, gloves, or a single ounce of mercy. The first dentist wasn't a specialist. They were just the unlucky member of the tribe with steady hands and poor decision-making skills. You shuffle out of your cave, clutching your jaw as the sun rises over the scrubby plains. The cold wind bites your face, and your breath smells like fermented berries and despair. There's no mint, no floss. The closest thing to mouthwash is swamp water, and even that's a gamble. Your diet doesn't help either. Prehistoric food is basically dental sandpaper. Nuts, seeds, gritty grains, and raw meat torn straight from the bone. Every bite grinds your enamel into submission. You don't just have plaque, you have a full geological layer forming on your teeth. And when the pain becomes unbearable, the tribe turns to you, the healer. You've got a few tools at your disposal: sharp flint for scraping, bone needles for picking, and beeswax for patching holes. That's right, beeswax. Prehistoric people actually used it as a kind of dental filler, softening it with warmth and pressing it into cracks and cavities. Scientists even found a 6,500-year-old tooth sealed with beeswax, proving that even in ancient times someone decided that melting honeycomb into your face was worth a try. So here you are, crouched beside the fire, preparing for dental surgery in a world that doesn't even have the concept of hygiene yet. Your patient, a fellow hunter, who looks like he's been chewing rocks for fun, sits in front of you. He's gripping a piece of wood to bite down on. You pick up your flint drill, hold it to his decayed molar, and start twisting. The smell is immediate. Burnt hair and something far worse. The sound is a gritty squeal that echoes in your skull. He thrashes. You hold him steady, and for a moment you understand why ancient people thought spirits lived inside the body. Because right now, something is definitely trying to escape his jaw. When it's over, you pack the hole with a paste of crushed herbs and animal fat. It's not entirely guesswork. Some prehistoric plants like yarrow and chamomile have mild pain-relieving and antibacterial effects. But you don't know that. You just know that it smells better than the infection. You pat your patient's shoulder, and if he doesn't pass out, you consider it a success. This is medicine before knowledge. Everything you do is a gamble. You can't see germs, but you know rot when you smell it. You can't name the nerves, but you can hear them screaming. And every time someone survives your treatment, you're hailed as a miracle worker instead of a hazard. Still, you have to admit, you've made progress. Beeswax fillings, herbal poultices, and flint drills might sound barbaric, but they're evidence of one thing. Early humans weren't stupid, they were desperate. Desperate enough to jam a sharpened rock into their own skulls if it meant stopping the pain. And as night falls, you sit by the fire again, watching the sparks float up into the dark. Your hands ache from drilling, your tools are dull, and your patient is sleeping soundly, probably from exhaustion. The air hums with insects, the earth smells of ash and blood, and you can't help but think that somewhere, thousands of years in the future, someone will still hate going to the dentist. So you've just finished chiseling an abscessed molar by firelight, and are wiping your hands on a mammoth hide when the tribe decides your healing powers might be supernatural. Congratulations, you're no longer just a dentist, you're now a spiritual leader, whether you like it or not. In the prehistoric world, pain wasn't just pain, it was a sign from the spirits, and toothache was a particularly suspicious one. When someone started clutching their face and groaning like a dying elk, the tribe assumed it was punishment for something far more mysterious than plaque buildup. Archaeological digs across Europe and Asia have revealed that teeth were often pulled, drilled, or even filed down not just for health, but for ritual. Some skulls from over 10,000 years ago show symmetrical patterns carved into the enamel. Not random damage, but deliberate designs. It turns out people weren't only trying to fix their teeth, they were decorating them. Tooth modification was an ancient form of identity, and sometimes even spiritual protection. A well-shaped tooth might keep away evil spirits, or at least that was the hope before infection set in. The logic behind it made sense in its own horrifying way. Pain meant bad spirits. Removing pain meant removing spirits. If you happened to die in the process, well, the spirit clearly wanted you more than the village did. For some early tribes, teeth were thought to hold memories and personality. Losing one meant losing part of your soul. That belief didn't fade quickly. Thousands of years later, medieval Europeans still buried teeth separately so they wouldn't come back during the resurrection. You can imagine the scene. A group of people gathered around the fire, humming or chanting as you scrape away at a molar with a bone awl, everyone convinced they're witnessing divine medicine. You, of course, know that nothing divine is happening. You're sweating, your hands are shaking, and the only thing keeping you from fainting is the smell of burning fat masking the blood. And yet, it works. Sometimes. The pain stops. The patient smiles a little too wide, and suddenly the tribe believes you've driven out a demon with your bare hands. The strange thing is, they weren't entirely wrong. They just didn't have the vocabulary for bacteria. The first humans to treat toothaches probably didn't know about infection, but they understood cause and effect. A wound left alone festered, one cleaned or burned healed. It was the earliest glimmer of scientific reasoning hiding inside superstition. And in a world where survival meant guessing correctly more often than you guessed wrong, that was enough. Fast forward a few millennia, and the idea of tooth rituals grew even weirder. Anthropologists studying early African and Southeast Asian cultures have found evidence of tooth filing ceremonies, group events where young people had their teeth sharpened or flattened to mark adulthood. Imagine being 13 years old and sitting through a coming-of-age party that involves having your front teeth sanded into triangles with a rock. It makes modern orthodontic braces look like a spa treatment. Of course, there was no anaesthetic, no antiseptic, and no concept of infection. What there was, however, was a remarkable tolerance for pain. Some tribes even believed that showing no reaction during the procedure made you spiritually stronger. Crying was considered weakness, though screaming into a pile of furs was probably permitted as long as no one saw. You begin to realise that prehistoric dentistry was only partly about health. It was as much about status, ritual, and survival. Clean teeth were rare, but impressive teeth, filed, drilled, decorated with plant dye or crushed minerals, told the world that you were someone worth looking at. Archaeologists have even discovered ancient graves where individuals were buried with polished teeth and carved bone tools beside them, a prehistoric version of the dentist toolkit. It wasn't vanity, it was identity, and maybe a little bit of insanity. You glance at your collection of flint drills and bone picks, each one worn smooth from use. You can't help but wonder how many mouths you've ruined in the name of progress. Still, the tribe trusts you. They bring you offerings, a handful of berries, a strip of dried meat, sometimes even beeswax, the most valuable material in your trade. You warm it over the fire, knead it into a soft glob, and use it to patch another cracked tooth. Thousands of years later, scientists will find those fillings and call it evidence of early medicine. You, in this moment, just call it another day of not being eaten. As the sun sinks below the horizon, the air in your cave grows cold and still. Your patient sleeps, breathing heavily, their mouth packed with herbs and hope. You sit beside them, staring at the faint red glow of the coals. You think about all the strange ways humans have tried to make sense of pain, drilling, chanting, sacrificing, decorating, and you realize that even though your methods are crude, the instinct behind them is timeless. People want to control what hurts them, to fight decay with meaning, to turn suffering into ritual. The flickering firelight catches the edge of your flint blade. You can see your reflection in the polished stone. Tired eyes, cracked lips, ash on your skin. It's not much of a mirror, but it's enough to notice something else. A dull ache in your own tooth, right where you've been chewing on tough roots all week. You touch it gingerly, wincing. For a moment you laugh under your breath, though it sounds more like a groan. Because it turns out even the prehistoric dentist isn't safe from his own work. And as the wind moans through the cave mouth, you suddenly remember the other ancient healers scattered across the world. The ones who didn't stop at teeth. The ones who believed they could fix the mind by opening the skull. You sit by the flickering light of the fire, still clutching your aching jaw, and begin to understand why prehistoric dentistry was more superstition than science. Somewhere along the way, someone decided that the reason people's teeth hurt was because tiny worms lived inside them. And not metaphorically, they meant actual worms. For thousands of years, across nearly every ancient culture, toothache wasn't blamed on cavities or decay, but on small, wriggling creatures gnawing away inside your mouth. Archaeological evidence and ancient medical texts from Mesopotamia, Egypt and China all describe these so-called toothworms. They were believed to crawl into teeth during sleep or after eating spoiled food, burrowing into the gums and feasting on your nerves. The earliest written reference to them comes from a Babylonian clay tablet dating back over 5,000 years, which calmly describes the worm as saying, "Set me a dwelling in the teeth and the gums." And humanity's reaction to this was essentially, well, that explains it. Once you believed your molar had a squatter, every toothache became a war against an invisible intruder. People tried everything to drive it out. Some smoked herbs or garlic directly onto the tooth, others poured heated oil or vinegar into the cavity. In ancient China, early physicians recommended burning a mixture of honey and dried frog to smoke out the worm. It sounds absurd, but it wasn't random. Honey has mild antibacterial properties, and heat would at least sterilize something. The problem was they didn't know which part worked, so they just kept adding frogs. The idea of toothworms spread faster than plaque. The Etruscans, Greeks, Romans, Persians, they all passed it along generation after generation, convinced their mouths were tiny worm farms. Even Hippocrates, the so-called father of medicine, mentioned them, and he was not alone. In the Middle Ages, European medical manuscripts show elaborate drawings of people opening their mouths, while physicians used long needles to hook out the worms. These weren't metaphors or myths. They truly believed they could see them writhing inside. Part of the confusion came from what a decayed tooth actually looked like. When infection set in, pus, nerves, and rotting tissue formed small, pale strings inside the cavity. Pull one out, and it looked suspiciously like a worm. That was all the evidence anyone needed. Once a superstition has visual proof, it becomes unstoppable. You can almost imagine being there, watching some Stone Age dentist crouched over a patient, whispering charms while dripping animal fat onto an open cavity to lure the imaginary worm out. Sometimes, the heat or herbs really did reduce pain by killing bacteria or numbing nerves. The patient would calm down, assume the worm had finally fled, and spread the story that the healer had triumphed over the creatures. For a belief built on complete misunderstanding, it actually led to surprisingly functional treatments. The worm theory persisted for millennia. Even after the invention of writing, metal tools and medicine, people kept blaming their molars on worms. In some parts of Europe, it survived well into the 1700s. Physicians prescribed smoke, sulphur, or even mercury to starve the tooth parasites. There are written accounts of blacksmiths heating iron rods and pressing them to aching teeth to burn out the worm, which worked beautifully if your goal was to trade a toothache for third-degree burns. This obsession with worms shaped how people treated oral hygiene. Instead of cleaning, they focused on prevention through ritual and diet. The Babylonians chewed twigs of the Salvadora tree, an early form of the toothbrush, because its fibrous texture cleaned plaque, though they believed it worked by scraping off invisible larvae. The Egyptians mixed crushed eggshells, pumice, and burnt ox hooves into a tooth powder, both as a cleaning agent and a curse repellent. Modern researchers tested these ancient mixtures and found that, aside from the occasional bone fragment, some actually worked better than 18th century toothpaste. The irony is that they were doing the right thing for all the wrong reasons. By the time you reach the Iron Age, the toothworm had practically earned celebrity status. Roman authors like Pliny the Elder warned that worms breed in the gums of the idle, which might be history's first dental hygiene guilt trip. Other cultures developed bizarre ways of dealing with them. Vikings wore small bronze amulets shaped like teeth to ward off worms. In medieval Europe, people placed the ashes of burned moles or toads on their aching gums, believing it made the worms flee from the smell. It didn't, but at least everyone stopped wanting to talk to them. Imagine what this must have felt like. A toothache that grows worse each day, a healer chanting over you while smoke fills your nostrils, the sound of sizzling oil dripping into your mouth. You cough, sputter, and try not to think about how every nerve in your jaw is screaming. The smell of herbs and burning fat hangs heavy in the air, and yet there's relief in believing there's something tangible to blame, something you can fight. It's oddly human, really. When you don't understand the problem, you invent something you can picture. The worm theory wasn't stupidity, it was comfort. People needed to believe their suffering had a cause that could be extracted, exorcised, or boiled alive. And it wasn't all superstition. In trying to fight imaginary worms, they stumbled upon real medicine, herbal anesthetics, antiseptics, and even the earliest forms of fillings. There's evidence from ancient Sumerian texts describing tooth powder made from crushed plants and minerals, and some of those ingredients appear again thousands of years later in Roman recipes. It shows that people were experimenting through trial and error, recording what worked, discarding what didn't, and passing on the knowledge. The myth of the worm gave them a framework for discovery. You lean back from your imaginary fire, staring into the orange glow, and realize how far human curiosity can go when pain is the teacher. A simple toothache inspired millennia of experimentation, trade, and even art. Some cultures carved charms depicting the worm god. Others painted teeth on pottery as symbols of vitality. A few even created songs about curing toothache, which, judging by how often they rhyme with scream, were likely not cheerful tunes. And yet, for all this creativity, the real culprit remained invisible until the late 1600s, when Dutch scientist Antonie van Leeuwenhoek used his handmade microscope to peer into a bit of dental plaque. What he saw wasn't worms, but something worse. Millions of living bacteria wriggling like a microscopic army. The truth was somehow even more horrifying than the myth. So you close your eyes and picture that prehistoric patient again, sitting cross-legged by the fire with smoke curling up around them, believing their agony comes from a small creature gnawing at their soul. In a way, they weren't wrong, they just had the wrong monster. You might assume the first humans didn't care about oral hygiene, but that's not true. Archaeologists have discovered that prehistoric people were surprisingly obsessed with picking their teeth. Fossilized skulls from Neanderthals to early Homo sapiens show deep grooves between the molars, worn smooth from centuries of prodding. The earliest toothbrush wasn't a fancy bristle tool. It was a stick, a bone splinter, or sometimes a thorn. anything pointy enough to dig out the leftovers of mammoth stew. In a way, prehistoric people invented the toothpick long before table manners existed. Researchers studying skeletons from the Upper Paleolithic period found microscopic scratches inside dental enamel, consistent with the repeated use of picks. Some individuals used fibrous twigs that left traces of plant residue wedged between their teeth, proof that even 40,000 years ago, people couldn't stand that feeling of something stuck in their gums. This makes early humans relatable in a deeply uncomfortable way. You can picture it perfectly. Sitting around the fire after a long hunt, everyone picking their teeth with the same stick they used to stir the stew. Of course, the problem wasn't just the food itself. The tools used to prepare it made things worse. Grinding stones used for processing grains shed tiny particles of silica, which mixed into flour and acted like sandpaper. When early farmers shifted from hunting to agriculture around 10,000 years ago, their dental health actually declined. Their softer, starch-heavy diets meant less chewing and more trapped food particles. The result was the first known global dental crisis. You could almost call it the world's first epidemic of cavities, only no one was around to sell toothpaste yet. This sudden spike in tooth decay was so severe that it left its mark in the archaeological record. Studies of Neolithic skeletons show that as people started eating more grains and less meat, enamel erosion became rampant. One site in Morocco revealed that nearly half the adult skulls had cavities, abscesses, or broken teeth. In essence, civilization brought farming, bread, and back pain, and with it the end of perfect Stone Age smiles. But where there's discomfort, there's innovation. Early humans didn't just pick their teeth. They began chewing plants that acted like primitive mouth cleansers. One of the most popular was Salvadora persica, known today as the toothbrush tree. It grows in parts of Africa and the Middle East and produces fibrous twigs with natural fluoride, tannins, and antiseptic compounds. People chewed one end into a frayed brush and used it to scrub their teeth clean. Modern studies show it actually works better than some commercial toothbrushes. The ancient world was essentially brushing long before anyone thought to market mint flavour. Other cultures developed their own methods. In prehistoric Japan, the Jomon people used animal sinew as floss, pulling strands of tendon between their teeth to scrape away food particles. In parts of Africa, ashes from burned wood were rubbed on the teeth as an abrasive cleanser, creating an early version of toothpaste. And in Europe, even Neanderthals experimented with chewing aromatic herbs like chamomile and yarrow, possibly to freshen breath or reduce inflammation. These discoveries prove that humans have always hated bad breath, even when their diet consisted mostly of raw meat and tubers. Imagine the morning routine of an early hunter. Wake up in a damp cave, stretch your aching joints, then grab a twig and start scrubbing your teeth while spitting into the dirt. There's no mirror, no minty freshness, and certainly no polite privacy. Hygiene was communal, much like everything else in prehistoric life. Your tools were shared, your meals were shared, and unfortunately so were your germs. Archaeologists examining DNA from ancient plaque samples have found evidence of bacteria responsible for gum disease and even early forms of oral yeast, which means you were likely swapping microbes with your entire clan every time someone borrowed your favourite toothstick. Even with their efforts, prehistoric people couldn't escape the brutal effects of their diet. The constant chewing of raw roots, unprocessed grains, and fibrous meat caused extreme wear on the teeth. Some skulls show molars worn nearly flat, the enamel polished away to expose dentin. This didn't just hurt, it created open pathways for infection. A 25,000-year-old skeleton found in Italy shows a healed abscess that must have caused weeks of agony before recovery. It's a reminder that prehistoric survival wasn't just about avoiding predators. Sometimes it was about surviving your own mouth. Interestingly, this harsh diet may have shaped the very structure of human faces. As teeth wore down and jaws adapted to different foods, skulls evolved to have smaller jaws and less pronounced teeth. In other words, the pain and erosion of countless prehistoric mouths slowly sculpted the human smile into what it is today. Every time you complain about wisdom teeth not fitting, you're really blaming 10,000 generations of people chewing on bark and bone. As agriculture spread and new foods entered the human diet, people adapted their cleaning habits to match. Some chewed resins like pine or mastic, which acted as natural breath fresheners. Others rinsed their mouths with fermented drinks that doubled as disinfectant, a convenient excuse to drink before breakfast. The ancient Egyptians even made a toothpaste recipe that included rock salt, pepper, and powdered iris flour. It was extremely effective, but also so abrasive it could sand your teeth into oblivion. Clean, yes. Comfortable, no. The remarkable thing is how universal the urge for clean teeth became. No matter where you go in early history, people were poking, scraping, and polishing. From the Arctic tundra to the Nile Valley, everyone seemed equally determined not to be remembered as the person with the worst breath in the tribe. Even without written communication, humanity collectively decided that the mouth was both sacred and disgusting. You sit back by the fire, flicking a small piece of sinew from your fingers, and glance toward the flicker of flint tools glinting in the corner. The same hands that carved weapons and hunted mammoths also created the earliest dental instruments. And while they didn't know the words bacteria or hygiene, they did understand comfort and pain. Everything we know about dentistry, the drills, the scrapers, even the fear, traces back to this primal scene. Somewhere in the distance you hear the crunch of bone and the chatter of chewing. It's not a pleasant sound. It reminds you that even as the centuries rolled on, teeth never stopped being both vital and vulnerable. They were a record of what people ate, where they lived, and how they suffered. Every fossilized jaw tells a story not of vanity but of endurance. The fire dies down, leaving behind a dim orange glow and the smell of ash. You rub your jaw and feel a sharp edge of enamel that's beginning to crack. You reach for your toothstick, chew the end into a frayed brush and get to work. You can't stop decay, but you can delay it, and that, in prehistoric terms, is a victory. The night grows quiet except for the distant howl of wind outside the cave. You close your eyes and try not to think about what tomorrow's meal will do to what's left of your teeth. Somewhere in your mind, the line between survival and suffering blurs again. Because long before crowns and root canals, before Novocaine and floss, being a prehistoric dentist wasn't about fixing smiles. It was about keeping humanity's last chewing tooth from giving up entirely. And as the fire fades to embers, you can't help but wonder what other strange rituals ancient people invented to fight off pain. Somewhere out there, beyond the dark plains and silent hills, another healer is preparing to cure more than just toothaches. One who believes the skull itself can be opened to let the spirits out. You have seen what happens when tooth decay spreads. The swelling, the fever, the trembling that follows when infection takes hold. It doesn't just stay in the mouth. It climbs, burrows, and festers behind the eyes. It drives people to madness. The tribe calls it curses or spirits, but you know better. You've seen the skulls of the dead, the dark holes that mark where something inside exploded outward. You've learned that sometimes the only way to survive is to open the skull and let whatever's trapped inside escape. This is how dentistry and surgery met for the first time. Not through curiosity, but through desperation. Thousands of years before modern medicine, prehistoric people discovered a procedure that would one day be called trepanation, drilling a hole into the skull to relieve pain, pressure, or whatever invisible evil they imagined lived within. And remarkably, some of them survived it. Archaeologists have uncovered skulls dating back over 9,000 years that show smooth edges around these openings, evidence of bone healing. That means the patients lived long enough for their bodies to start repairing the damage. In France, more than 40 Neolithic skulls have been found with these circular marks, each a silent record of ancient surgery. It wasn't random violence. The cuts were too precise, the holes too even. Someone, somewhere, was experimenting with how to fix the human head, probably right after failing to fix a toothache. It makes sense in a grim kind of way. dental infections can cause excruciating facial pain and swelling that creeps upward. The ancient mind might have imagined a spirit crawling into the skull from the teeth. If your molar could host a worm, your head could certainly host something worse. So when nothing else worked, when the smoke, herbs and beeswax all failed, there was only one option left. Cut the pain out directly. You can imagine the scene as it must have been. A body laid out on the cave floor, a circle of anxious faces hovering nearby, the air heavy with the smell of herbs, ash and fear. The surgeon kneels, flint blade in hand, and begins scraping through the scalp. There's no anesthesia, no bandages, no sterile surface, just stone, bone, and human determination. The process is slow, patient, rhythmic. Scrape, blow, scrape again. Hours pass before the blade finally reaches the bone, the first gleaming layer of skull showing through. It's horrific to think about, but it worked. The pressure released, the pain stopped, the spirit was freed. Maybe it was infection draining, maybe pure luck. But for a world without microscopes or painkillers, it was a miracle. Evidence shows that trepanation was practiced on every continent except Antarctica, from the Andes to Africa to Polynesia. Humanity, it seems, collectively decided that the solution to head pain was to poke a hole in it. Of course, not every case ended well. Some skulls show multiple attempts, holes half finished or crudely widened, suggesting the patient didn't make it. In Peru, where the technique was refined over thousands of years, survival rates reach nearly 80%, a figure that rivals some 19th century surgeries. In Europe, the odds were worse. Early surgeons had the right idea but lacked finesse. Their tools were clumsy, and infection often did the rest. Yet the persistence is staggering. People kept doing it for thousands of years, passing down knowledge by sight and memory. The tools were nearly identical to your own: flint, obsidian, or even sharpened bone. Obsidian blades, in particular, could be honed to a microscopic edge, far sharper than modern steel. Experiments today show they can slice tissue so cleanly that healing is faster and scarring is reduced. The irony is hard to ignore. The same volcanic glass that made weapons and spear tips was also humanity's first surgical scalpel. If you step back and think about it, these early dentists and surgeons weren't mad. They were problem solvers in a brutal environment. They noticed that some people's pain stopped after they were wounded in the head. They noticed patterns in who lived and who didn't. That's not magic, that's observation. It's the beginning of science, hiding beneath a thick layer of superstition and blood. And in that moment, you see the connection clearly. The same logic that led to scraping out a cavity led to opening a skull. It's not separate fields of medicine. It's one long chain of trial and error, held together by curiosity and the refusal to surrender to pain. Dentistry wasn't just about smiles, it was about survival. Imagine the courage, or perhaps the desperation, it took to sit still while someone carved into your head with a rock. No ropes, no anesthesia, just sheer willpower and trust. Some cultures believed that surviving trepanation gave a person special powers, the ability to see spirits, speak with ancestors, or heal others. In reality, the survivors were just people whose infections happened to drain instead of spread. But the legend persisted. You stir the ashes beside you, the glow lighting up the edge of your flint tools. It's strange to think that these same methods, scraping, drilling, heating, form the foundation of modern medicine. Every dental drill, every surgical incision, every sterile technique can trace its ancestry back to someone crouched by a fire with a shard of stone. And that shard, in the right hands, could save a life. Even in prehistoric times, there was a sense of procedure. The patient was often treated with herbs before and after, likely to dull pain or fight infection. Certain plants, like willow bark, contained salicin, the natural form of aspirin. Others, like mint, garlic, and yarrow, had antiseptic properties. People didn't understand chemistry, but they understood patterns. Wounds cleaned with certain plants healed better. It's humbling to realise that medicine didn't start in universities. It started in caves, with smoke, patience, and trial. You lean back, running a finger along the smooth surface of a skull, tracing one of the ancient holes. There's no sound except the crackle of the fire. You start to imagine what might come next. What happens when humans begin to truly link pain to cause, sickness to substance, healing to the body itself rather than the spirit. Because the story of dentistry and surgery doesn't end with bone tools and beeswax. Eventually, the experiments of your ancestors evolve into something even stranger. A time when humans start mixing metal with mouths, creating the first dental implants. Not for beauty, not for comfort, but because even in the ancient world, people refuse to let missing teeth get in the way of survival. Morning light creeps into the mouth of your cave, glinting off a collection of bones and stones scattered beside the fire. You pick up a small jawbone and turn it in your hand, studying the smooth sockets where teeth once sat. Most are gone, lost to decay or gnawed away by time, but one still remains, wedged deep into the bone, and it isn't human. It's a carved piece of seashell. You run your thumb over its edge and realise that someone long before you tried to replace what nature had taken. That tiny fragment is one of humanity's earliest attempts at a dental implant, and remarkably, it worked. Archaeologists have found skulls in places like Honduras, Egypt, and the Mediterranean, with artificial teeth made of bone, ivory, or shells inserted into the jaw. Some even show signs of healing around the implant, meaning the patient survived long enough for their bone to start growing around it. That's not just ancient dentistry, that's prehistoric bioengineering. It's hard to say exactly why they did it. Vanity might have played a part, but in early human societies, a missing tooth was more than a cosmetic issue. Teeth were tools. They tore fibres, cracked nuts, and even softened leather. Losing one was like losing a finger, maybe worse. So early healers did what humans always do when faced with discomfort. They improvised. A broken tooth wasn't an ending, it was a challenge. And if you could carve weapons from stone, you could certainly carve a new incisor. The oldest known implant dates back nearly 4,000 years, found in the jaw of a young woman in Honduras. She had 3 shell fragments neatly shaped to fit into the spaces of missing teeth. Later studies using X-rays showed that the bone had grown around the shells, securing them in place. That means her body accepted the material instead of rejecting it, something even modern surgeons struggled to achieve until the 20th century. The irony is almost poetic. The first dentists didn't have sterilized instruments or anesthesia, but they accidentally stumbled upon one of the most advanced principles in modern medicine: biocompatibility. Elsewhere in the ancient world, people were experimenting with similar ideas. In Egypt, archaeologists uncovered mummies with gold wire wrapped around teeth, possibly to secure replacements. In the Etruscan tombs of Italy, false teeth made from ox bone or even human teeth were found held together with thin metal bands. The Etruscans, who lived around 700 BCE, were among the first to turn dentistry into something resembling an art form. They crafted bridges and dentures that were so elegant they could almost pass for jewellery. There's even evidence that some replacements were taken from other people, a detail that makes every smile in ancient Italy feel a little less comforting. The materials varied, but the motivation stayed the same. A full set of teeth meant power, status, and health. In societies where most people lost their molars by middle age, being able to flash an intact smile was a sign of divine favour. Egyptian nobles were buried with spare teeth carved from precious materials, a literal insurance policy for the afterlife. Some wore gold caps, not for medical reasons, but because gold symbolised eternal strength. It was the ancient equivalent of dental bling. Still, for every successful implant there were countless failures. A bone or shell might look perfect, but once placed in a fresh socket, infection could set in within days. Without antiseptics or antibiotics, even a small mistake could turn fatal, and yet people kept trying. The persistence of dental experimentation shows a level of medical curiosity that's astonishing for its time. These were civilizations that had no germ theory, no microscopes, and often no word for disease. Yet they understood something that modern dentistry still preaches. Appearance and function are both worth saving. As trade expanded and metallurgy improved, so did dental technology. By the Iron Age, artisans were forging intricate gold bands to secure replacement teeth. Some scholars believe these early prosthetics were as much ceremonial as practical. They weren't meant to chew, they were meant to impress. Imagine sitting at a feast with a mouthful of gold and ivory, smiling through the pain while your neighbours quietly wonder where you got those teeth. The use of human teeth became common enough that an entire trade developed around it. In later centuries, grave robbers and battlefield scavengers would harvest teeth from corpses to sell for transplants, a practice that survived into the 1800s. The so-called Waterloo teeth came from fallen soldiers after the Battle of Waterloo, their molars cleaned, polished, and fitted into dentures for the wealthy. It's grim, but it highlights a continuity stretching back thousands of years. One person's loss was another person's dental upgrade. It's almost poetic how much human history revolves around teeth. Every civilization treated them as more than tools. They were symbols of youth, power, and vitality. Ancient Chinese texts from the Zhou dynasty describe tooth loss as a sign of declining energy, a spiritual imbalance that needed correction. In Mesoamerica, carved jade or turquoise teeth were not only decorative but ritualistic. Archaeologists have found skulls from the Maya civilization, with teeth inlaid with gemstones using natural adhesives made from plant resins. The results are dazzling, but also horrifying when you imagine the process. No numbing agent, no antiseptic, just a drill made from obsidian and the sound of someone regretting every life choice that led them there. Even the idea of tooth transplantation wasn't new. The ancient Phoenicians experimented with moving teeth from one person to another, hoping they'd take root. Sometimes they did, most often they didn't. But the very attempt shows that people were already thinking about living tissue in ways that foreshadowed modern grafting techniques. They didn't have words like osteointegration or cell regeneration, but they knew that some materials fuse better with the body than others. Shells, bone, ivory and gold were the prehistoric versions of titanium. As you sit back, staring into the smoke curling toward the ceiling, you can't help but marvel at how much pain and ingenuity humanity has endured for the sake of keeping its teeth. The sound of scraping flint and hammering metal echoes faintly through the centuries. Every time someone experimented with replacing a missing molar, they were doing more than just patching up a mouth. They were redefining what it meant to be human, resilient, resourceful, and slightly insane. You glance at the carved shell again, its surface gleaming faintly in the firelight. It's crude by modern standards, but it's a symbol of defiance. The body may decay, but people refuse to let that decay define them. In the end, a prehistoric dentist wasn't just a healer. They were an artist, a craftsman, and occasionally a gravedigger. And as your thoughts drift between admiration and discomfort, the line between medicine and superstition begins to blur once more. Because if people were willing to drill their skulls and carve new teeth, what else were they willing to do in the name of healing? The answer lies not in bone or shell, but in what they put inside their mouths next. Strange potions, bitter herbs, and prehistoric mouthwashes that could strip paint from a wall. The fire's smoke curls lazily upward as you swirl a mouthful of water in your mouth and immediately gag. It tastes like dirt, smoke, and something that definitely used to be alive. Congratulations, you've just invented the world's first mouthwash, completely by accident. In the prehistoric world, hygiene wasn't about freshness, it was about survival. Your mouth wasn't just for smiling or chewing, it was the front line of infection, the gateway to disease, and for the most part a damp, festering swamp of bacteria you couldn't see but could definitely smell. And yet, despite living without mirrors, soap, or even the faintest understanding of germs, humans still tried to clean their mouths. The effort was heroic, if not misguided. Archaeologists studying early civilizations discovered traces of herbal rinses, ash mixtures, and even fermented liquids used to purify the mouth. Ancient Sumerians and Egyptians were pioneers of dental disgust, creating brews that can only be described as liquid punishment. One Egyptian recipe from around 1500 BCE called for rinsing with a blend of crushed salt, mint leaves, dried flowers, and donkey milk. It probably smelled better than it tasted, though it did offer some genuine antibacterial benefits, thanks to the salt and mint. The milk, however, was a questionable choice in a desert climate. Long before that, prehistoric people had their own versions. They didn't have scrolls or written instructions, just instinct and observation. They learned that chewing certain plants left the mouth feeling cleaner. Some plants, like thyme and sage, naturally kill bacteria. Others, like bitter roots, simply made everything else taste so awful that you forgot your mouth was the problem. It's likely that early humans discovered mouth-cleansing rituals by accident. A sip of mineral-rich stream water here, a chew of fragrant leaf there, and suddenly you're the tribe's newest innovator. Even Neanderthals got on the action. Analysis of plaque from 40,000-year-old Neanderthal teeth found microscopic particles of poplar bark, which contains salicin, the natural chemical found in aspirin. That means they were self-medicating tooth pain long before humans invented the concept of dentistry. They also chewed wild herbs like yarrow and chamomile, which have mild antiseptic properties. Whether they were cleaning their mouths or numbing them into submission, the result was the same, a prehistoric rinse cycle. Over time, these crude methods evolved. Once people began using fire daily, ash became a common ingredient in mouth cleansing. Wood ash mixed with water creates an alkaline solution, similar to lye, that can break down grease and kill bacteria. Of course, it also burns like acid if you get the ratio wrong. Still, it worked well enough that versions of ash mouthwash persisted into the medieval period. There's something oddly comforting about the fact that humans have been willingly gargling with fire residue for tens of thousands of years. The transition from chewing sticks to rinsing came naturally. Once people began storing liquids in containers, gourds, shells, or animal bladders, it became possible to mix ingredients and share them. Someone likely added salt to keep the mixture from spoiling. Another tossed in herbs for taste, and before long the first community mouthwash station was born. Whether or not it was effective depended entirely on the ingredients. Saltwater rinses, still used today, were one of the earliest consistent remedies. They reduced swelling, killed some bacteria, and made you feel marginally cleaner. But ancient ingenuity didn't stop there. Some cultures experimented with vinegar, alcohol, or even fermented grain mash. Early beer and wine weren't filtered, so they were filled with yeast, bacteria, and the occasional surprise insect. Rinsing with them was less about freshness and more about desperation. In regions where water was unsafe, alcohol became the safer choice, which means some of the first mouthwashes probably got you tipsy. As trade expanded, exotic ingredients found their way into ancient hygiene. Cinnamon, myrrh, and clove, once used in religious rituals, became prized for their pleasant scent and ability to numb pain. Myrrh, in particular, has antiseptic properties and appears in Egyptian embalming recipes as well as early oral care mixtures. If it could preserve a corpse, it could probably preserve your gums. The overlap between medical and funerary practices was uncomfortably close. You can almost picture it. A prehistoric healer crouched by the fire mixing crushed bark, salt and water into a grimy bowl while the patient sits nearby, clutching their swollen jaw. The concoction is handed over like a sacred elixir. They take a sip, swish, and instantly regret every decision that led to this moment. The smell of burnt herbs fills the cave. Someone mutters a prayer, and if the pain dulls, even slightly, it becomes legend. From that day on, every mouth in the tribe is subjected to the same punishment in the name of health. As civilizations grew, mouthwash became more formalized. Ancient Greeks and Romans used mixtures of vinegar, salt, and urine. Yes, urine. believing the ammonia kept their mouths clean. And technically, it did. The ammonia in stale urine kills bacteria and whitens teeth, making it one of history's most disturbingly effective cleaning agents. Roman authors even documented the import of Portuguese urine, which was considered especially potent. It's hard to imagine customs officials inspecting barrels labelled best for whitening smiles. In the ancient world, hygiene was as much about class as it was about health. Wealthy people used perfumed oils to rinse their mouths, while the poor stuck to brine or sour milk. The difference wasn't in effectiveness, just experience. Rich or poor, everyone suffered equally from decay, but the rich at least smelled nice while doing it. Modern science now backs up some of those ancient choices. Many of the plants and minerals used in prehistoric mouthwashes contain compounds still used in dental products today. Salt reduces inflammation. Mint and thyme kill bacteria. Vinegar alters mouth pH to slow decay. It's humbling to think that prehistoric trial and error laid the groundwork for every neon-coloured bottle sitting in bathroom cabinets today. The main difference is flavour. Your minty, cool breeze was once boiled salt milk with herbs. As the fire burns lower, you rinse your mouth again with a handful of cold water, trying to ignore the taste of smoke and soil. It's not pleasant, but it's better than the alternative. Your teeth may be worn and cracked, but they're still yours. You spit into the dirt watching the water darken, and imagine how long it took humanity to move from this to fluoride. In a way, prehistoric people were right to obsess over their mouths. The same bacteria that caused gum disease also contributed to heart problems, joint pain, and systemic infections. Their crude rinses and chewed herbs might have saved more lives than they realized. By cleaning their mouths, they were inadvertently protecting their bodies. You lean back and feel the faint sting of salt still on your tongue. It's strange, isn't it? Every time you swish mouthwash today, you're performing a ritual as old as civilization itself. A ritual born not from vanity, but from pain. And somewhere deep in the past, an ancestor crouched by a smoky fire just like this, swirling their own bitter brew, hoping it might make tomorrow's meal a little less unbearable. And as that thought settles, another one creeps in. If early humans could figure out mouthwash, what did they use for toothpaste? Because history's first attempt at that might make even a prehistoric dentist gag. You spit into the dirt, the aftertaste of salt and smoke still lingering, and reach for something to scrape your tongue. The water helped a little, but your mouth still feels like you licked the inside of a mammoth hide. Somewhere between survival and self-preservation, the human instinct to clean began to evolve into something stranger, an obsession. It wasn't enough to rinse. People wanted to scrub, and that simple desire to stop tasting death in the morning gave birth to one of the most persistent inventions in history, toothpaste. Only in the beginning it was less paste and more punishment. Long before mint-flavoured gels and whitening strips, prehistoric humans were mixing up gritty powders from whatever they could grind between rocks. The result was a combination of ash, crushed bones, burnt shells, and powdered charcoal, all smeared onto teeth with a finger or stick. It wasn't pleasant, but it worked. Microscopic analysis of ancient skulls shows that these abrasive mixtures actually reduced plaque. They also removed enamel, gum tissue, and most of your will to live. And the earliest written evidence of toothpaste comes from ancient Egypt around 5,000 years ago, but the habit itself likely started thousands of years earlier. People learned through trial and error that a dirty mouth made sickness worse. It's the same logic that led them to wash wounds with urine or smear honey on cuts. If it burns, it's working. Egyptian texts describe one particularly brutal recipe, a mix of crushed rock salt, dried iris flower, mint and pepper. When modern researchers recreated it in the 1980s, volunteers described it as shockingly effective and impossible to survive twice. It cleaned beautifully but stripped gums raw in minutes. Still, the Egyptians were ahead of their time. They treated oral hygiene as a daily ritual, and even tomb paintings show people holding what appear to be small sticks with frayed ends, the first toothbrushes, Some mummies were found with their teeth packed in linen and smeared with resin to prevent decay in the afterlife. In a way, they were the first civilization to believe that bad breath could follow you beyond death. Meanwhile, far from the Nile, other cultures were experimenting with their own concoctions. In ancient India, early Ayurvedic texts recommended brushing with twigs from specific trees like neem and acacia, believed to have purifying properties. The practice of using chew sticks spread across Africa and Asia, becoming one of humanity's longest-lasting dental traditions. Even today, millions still use them, and studies show they clean as effectively as modern toothbrushes. That's 10,000 years of oral tradition that can beat a battery-powered brush. The Greeks and Romans took things further, as they tended to do with everything. Their toothpaste recipes included crushed oyster shells, bone powder, pumice, and vinegar. The Romans even added charcoal and tree bark to polish the teeth, because who doesn't want their gums bleeding and smelling faintly of campfire? Some elite citizens mixed their paste with urine, convinced that the ammonia would whiten their smiles. It did, but at a cost. Roman poets wrote gleefully about rivals whose gleaming teeth smelled like public latrines, which may be the oldest recorded instance of dental bullying. By the time you reach the ancient Chinese, oral hygiene had evolved into something bordering on mystical. They ground herbs like ginseng and mint into fine powders, mixed with salt and even burned pig bones. The result was a smoother paste that didn't just clean but freshen the breath. One surviving Chinese text from around 300 BCE mentions a formula that promised to brighten the smile and strengthen the spirit. It's one of the earliest connections between clean teeth and personal vitality, a theme that would stick around for the next few millennia. But prehistoric toothpaste wasn't always about hygiene. Sometimes it was about ritual. Anthropologists studying early human remains found traces of clay and chalk on teeth, in regions with no dietary reason for them. One theory suggests that early people chewed these substances to clean the mouth before ceremonies or hunts. Some clays contained minerals that neutralized bacteria, but others were simply dirt. Imagine standing before your tribe, smearing mud on your teeth to look cleansed, and feeling righteous while slowly grinding your enamel into dust. Even stranger, early toothpaste was occasionally flavored with things you wouldn't expect. Burned honeycomb, crushed eggshells, and ashes from animal fat were all common additives. In Mesoamerica, people chewed on crushed cocoa beans for cleaning, not for sweetness, but because cocoa shells are abrasive. Across the world, humanity's first dental product line could have been called Now with Extra Sand. And yet the instinct made sense. A clean mouth wasn't just vanity, it was survival. In an age before antibiotics, gum infections could kill. Ancient skulls showed clear evidence of abscesses that bored through bone, draining infection into the bloodstream. For every person who scraped their gums bloody trying to stay clean, a few probably saved their lives without realizing it. Pain drove innovation, and the mouth was the perfect laboratory. You look down at your own tools beside the fire, flint scrapers, a bundle of chewed sticks, a bowl of ash and crushed bone. This, you realize, is the prehistoric version of a bathroom counter, the world's first dental kit. Every ingredient chosen not by design, but by desperation. The human mouth had become a battlefield, and cleaning it was a daily act of rebellion against rot. It's fascinating how the idea of hygiene evolved alongside civilization. As soon as people began living in groups, oral cleanliness became social currency. A cleaner mouth meant fewer infections, which meant longer life, which meant more time to pass on those hygiene habits to the next generation. In a way, toothpaste was one of humanity's first inherited technologies. By the medieval period, toothpaste formulas had gotten more sophisticated but not much safer. European recipes called for burnt bread, chalk, or crushed gemstones mixed with vinegar. One 12th century English guide recommended rubbing your teeth with powdered sage and salt, then rinsing with wine. It was basically mouth care by way of dinner prep. A medieval monk even suggested using crushed snail shells to whiten the teeth and strengthen the gums. proving once again that history's greatest medical advice often came from people who had never tried their own remedies. Still, the prehistoric logic never vanished. Clean equals healthy. Pain means something's wrong. People kept scraping, rinsing, and grinding in pursuit of a pain-free mouth, unaware that the bacteria they fought had already outsmarted them. It's oddly comforting and horrifying at the same time to realise that in 20,000 years, we haven't changed that much. We just replaced bone powder with baking soda and hope with branding. The wind outside the cave hums softly through the cracks as you spit out another mouthful of ash. The taste is awful, but your teeth feel smoother, cleaner. For a moment you smile into the darkness, proud of your discovery. Then your gums start bleeding again, and you wonder if cleanliness might actually be trying to kill you. Somewhere deep in the ancient night, another healer crouches over a pile of herbs and bones, trying to invent something gentler. A salve, perhaps, to soothe those raw gums. Maybe a balm to heal the damage done by your own invention. And in that spark of curiosity lies the next step in the story of human mouths. When people begin to realise that fixing teeth isn't enough, you have to heal them. The fire flickers low as you stare into the bowl beside you, filled with an unpleasant mash of herbs, roots, and something that might have once been an insect. It smells like a mixture of dirt and disappointment. Still, this is medicine. Or at least, it's as close as you're going to get in a world without pharmacies or common sense. Your mouth throbs from the last attempt at cleaning it with ash and bone powder, and your gums feel like they've been sanded smooth. You reach for a handful of chewed herbs and press them against the aching tooth, silently praying it works better than the last time. For as long as humans have had teeth, they've been trying to fix them with plants. Archaeologists studying prehistoric skeletons have found microscopic traces of medicinal herbs in dental plaque, suggesting that people weren't just eating plants for food, they were chewing them for healing. Neanderthals in Spain, for instance, had fragments of poplar bark lodged in their teeth, the same bark that contained salicin, the natural painkiller found in aspirin. In other words, your distant ancestors were self-medicating before humanity even invented writing. They just did it with a lot more chewing involved. The earliest human dentists were really herbalists in disguise. They didn't understand anatomy, but they knew patterns. If someone's swollen jaw eased after chewing a certain leaf, it became a sacred plant. If someone's gums bled less after using a root, it became tradition. Over generations, these discoveries formed the basis of what we'd now call herbal dentistry. Willow bark for pain, garlic for infection, mint to make your mouth smell slightly less like something that died last week. It wasn't all guesswork either. Many of these remedies genuinely worked. Modern studies confirm that herbs used by ancient healers contained compounds that fight bacteria, reduce inflammation, and even promote healing. Yarrow, a common prehistoric herb, has antiseptic and clotting properties. Thyme and sage kill bacteria. Licorice root soothes sore gums. The prehistoric world might have been primitive, but it was also surprisingly pharmaceutical. The difference was in delivery. Instead of tablets or tinctures, your medicine came chewed, spat, or smeared directly into the wound by someone whose hands hadn't been washed since the last mammoth hunt. As settlements grew and agriculture spread, herbal medicine became more structured. People began trading dried plants and roots, creating the world's first pharmacies, dusty huts filled with bundles of mysterious vegetation hanging from the ceiling. These early healers weren't just treating toothaches. They were building a system of medicine based on the only laboratory they had, the human mouth. In Mesopotamia, one of the earliest written dental prescriptions was found on a clay tablet dating back to 1800 BCE. It advised mixing powdered henbane seed with beer and applying it to the aching tooth. Henbane is a hallucinogenic plant that numbs pain while also making you mildly delirious. The combination of intoxication and sedation probably did help, though the side effects included dizziness, nausea, and the strong desire to never drink beer again. The Egyptians, never ones to shy away from experimentation, turned herbal dentistry into a state science. Papyrus scrolls like the Ebers Papyrus, circa 1550 BCE, lists dozens of mouth treatments using honey, incense, onions, and myrrh. Honey, as it turns out, is a powerful antibacterial agent, and the Egyptians were masters at using it for wounds and infections. Myrrh, the same resin burned in temples, also appears repeatedly as a treatment for gum disease. Some of their recipes even combined crushed minerals like malachite with herbs to strengthen the teeth. It's difficult to say whether this was effective or just impressive alchemy, but it shows a deep awareness of the mouth's connection to health. Meanwhile, in ancient China, early herbalists developed complex blends of roots and spices to treat what they called heat in the gums. Ginger, cloves, and cinnamon were prescribed to balance the body's internal energy, but they also contained natural painkillers. The ancient Chinese were among the first to realize that dental pain wasn't just local. It was connected to the rest of the body. Toothache meant imbalance, and the cure required restoring harmony. A beautiful concept until you remember it sometimes involved swallowing ground insects. In prehistoric Europe, the approach was more practical. People chewed herbs directly or packed them into cavities. Excavations in Neolithic burial sites reveal skulls with plant fibers stuffed into decayed teeth, suggesting a form of early herbal filling. The pain relief may have been mild, but it was something. Imagine crouching beside a smoky fire, using your own saliva as a solvent while you pack your molar with mashed wild garlic and crushed bark. The taste alone would distract you from the pain. Not all remedies were as wise. Some prehistoric healers believed toothache came from angry spirits trapped inside the skull, and herbs were burned not for their medicine but for their smoke. Patients were told to inhale the fumes or let the smoke drift into the mouth to choke the spirit. This method often resulted in mild anesthesia from carbon monoxide poisoning, which technically worked, though for all the wrong reasons. Still, even the strangest experiments pushed human understanding forward. By trying everything that grew from the ground, people slowly identified what worked and what didn't. Herbal healing bridged the gap between instinct and science. It gave rise to medicine's first organized discipline, pharmacology, long before anyone could spell the word. You stir the dying coals of your fire and crush a few dried leaves between your fingers. The smell rises sharp and earthy, filling the air with something almost comforting. Somewhere in that scent is a trace of history. The same plants that soothed pain 10,000 years ago still used in modern medicine today. You can almost see the line stretching from this smoky cave to the shelves of a modern pharmacy, where the ingredients are bottled, labelled, and flavoured to taste like fruit instead of compost. The truth is, the prehistoric dentist wasn't just a carver of bone. They were a botanist, a chemist, a healer, and sometimes a gambler. Every plant was a potential cure or poison. The line between relief and disaster was razor thin. Some herbs numbed the gums, others stopped the heart. Trial and error wasn't just a method, it was survival. And every successful mixture, every patient who woke up instead of passing out, pushed humanity's understanding of medicine a little further. You take a small sip of your own concoction, a murky green brew that tastes like boiled moss and regret. Your gums tingle, then go blissfully numb. For a moment the pain fades, and you almost feel triumphant. The herbalists of the ancient world might not have known what a molecule was, but they knew what mattered. Pain gone, mouth working, life continuing. That was enough. As you set the bowl down and watch the embers glow, another thought creeps in. If people were willing to chew plants, burn smoke, and grind stones to save a tooth, what did they do when the problem wasn't the pain, but the infection that followed? Because when the herbs failed, and the swelling spread, the prehistoric dentist reached for something far more disturbing. Something found not in plants, but in animals. The last of the herbal brew settles at the bottom of the bowl, a bitter sludge that's done its job. Your mouth no longer throbs, but a deeper ache has begun to creep through your jaw. You've treated it with roots, salt, and smoke. Yet something inside is still growing, pulsing, spreading. You can feel it in your cheek, a slow drumbeat beneath the skin. The herbs have failed, and in the world of the prehistoric dentist, when plants could no longer save you, the next cure came from something far less leafy: the animal kingdom. Early humans were convinced that every creature on Earth carried its own kind of magic, and if something survived the wild, perhaps its strength could be borrowed. If an animal had strong teeth, its bones or fat might cure toothache. If a predator never seemed to get sick, its blood might cleanse infection. It was medicine by imitation, a logic born not from science, but from observation and desperation. Archaeologists have found evidence of animal-based remedies stretching back tens of thousands of years. Residue in ancient pots, fossilized dental plaque, and written recipes on clay tablets all tell the same story. Humans didn't just eat animals, they used them to heal. In prehistoric dentistry, the animal was your pharmacist, anesthetist, and occasionally your sacrifice. Let's start with the most disturbing yet somehow practical of all: animal fat. In the Neolithic period, people began using melted fat as a base for salves and fillings. Mixed with ash or crushed herbs, it became a sticky balm that could be smeared over infected gums or packed into decayed teeth. Fat sealed wounds and slowed bacterial growth. It was the world's first antibiotic cream, though the smell could knock a person unconscious before it healed them. Some prehistoric skulls show traces of organic residue in cavities, suggesting that animal fat and beeswax were used together to plug holes. It's a miracle of biology and bad taste rolled into one. Other remedies were less effective and more theatrical. In ancient Mesopotamia, tooth pain was sometimes treated with mixtures made from lizard's blood, bat wings, and ground mouse bones. These ingredients were heated together and rubbed onto the gums while the healer chanted. The ritual wasn't random. Each animal represented a different force of nature. The bat was nocturnal, a creature of mystery and healing. The mouse, small and quick, was believed to chase away pain. It was part pharmacology, part theatre, part panic. And sometimes it worked. Mostly because the person was so distracted by the smell that they forgot about their toothache. The Egyptians also loved their animal concoctions, and few civilizations recorded them with more confidence. One common dental treatment involved mixing powdered ox hooves with myrrh and honey to create a kind of sticky paste. The ox represented strength, the honey fought infection, and the myrrh masked the horror of the smell. Other recipes suggested using goose fat or crocodile dung as dental ointment. You can't say they lacked imagination, only restraint. The crocodile dung in particular was thought to balance bodily energies, though historians suspect it mostly balanced your desire to live against your will to breathe. In prehistoric Europe, things got creative. Animal bones weren't just ground into paste. They were used as surgical tools. Small polished fragments of rib or femur were shaped into scoops and scrapers for cleaning cavities or removing damaged tissue. Imagine lying back in a smoky hut, watching someone dig into your mouth with a piece of bone that still has marrow in it. The logic was simple. Bone was tough, smooth, and familiar. And in a time before metal, it was as close as anyone got to stainless steel. But it wasn't just bones and fat. Teeth themselves were medicine. Across many cultures, worn or broken animal teeth were tied to cords and hung around the neck as charms to protect against dental pain. Some prehistoric graves contain necklaces made entirely of animal teeth, suggesting that early humans believed in the transference of health. A wolf's fang might grant resilience. A boar's tusk might bring endurance. Whether symbolic or practical, these relics show just how much people feared losing their teeth. Even milk had its place in early medicine. In some hunter-gatherer communities, sour milk or curd was used as a rinse for inflamed gums. Lactic acid helped neutralize bacteria, though it also smelled like someone had died inside your mouth. In other regions, particularly the steppe cultures of Central Asia, fermented mare's milk was believed to purify the mouth and strengthen the teeth. It didn't, but it did guarantee that no one wanted to come close enough to find out. As societies became more advanced, these animal remedies became codified into ritual. In ancient Greece, for instance, Aristotle wrote that placing the tooth of a wolf in the mouth of a child could prevent future toothaches. Roman naturalists like Pliny the Elder recorded recipes involving boiled frogs, burnt hair fur, and powdered deer antler. One Roman physician even claimed that the ashes of a mouse mixed with honey would draw out the worm of the tooth. It didn't, of course, but it did continue the long tradition of using animals to explain everything people didn't understand. You can almost sympathise. Without microscopes or antibiotics, pain was a mystery. When a patient's jaw swelled and their breath smelled foul, the healer looked for meaning in nature. Everything alive had a purpose, every organ a counterpart. To fix a failing mouth, you needed the strength of another creature. The prehistoric dentist was part doctor, part shaman, part collector of things you'd rather not chew. The practice didn't fade quickly. Even in medieval Europe, animal remedies remained popular. People rubbed pigs' teeth on their gums to prevent decay, or held a dead mole against their cheek to cure swelling. In Icelandic folklore, drinking broth made from wolf bones was said to harden weak teeth. The logic behind these cures was primitive but consistent. The body could absorb the qualities of what it consumed. Eat strength, gain strength, chew endurance, become unbreakable. It's the same logic that inspired countless bad ideas throughout human history. What's fascinating is that a few of these animal treatments actually had a scientific basis. Honey and fat worked as antibacterial agents. Bone dust provided calcium. Even the ashes from burned hooves contained trace minerals that supported enamel health. The difference was that early humans didn't know why something worked, only that it sometimes did. They were experimenting with biology long before biology existed as a science. Every mixture, every ritual, every disgusting paste was a step closer to understanding the chemistry of life. You set down your bowl, the last remnants of your own animal concoction crusting at the edges. The fire pops, sending sparks into the darkness. The smell of burnt fat hangs heavy in the air, mingling with the scent of herbs and smoke. You wonder how many centuries it took for people to realise that the answers they sought weren't in the teeth of wolves or the blood of bats, but in the invisible world crawling inside their mouths. Still, in the dim light, it's easy to see why the ancient mind found meaning in animals. They were symbols of survival, and in a world that killed the weak, borrowing a little strength from the wild didn't seem so foolish. Somewhere between instinct and invention, between superstition and science, the prehistoric dentist laid the foundation for something truly remarkable. The idea that medicine could be extracted, refined, and reused. And as the night grows colder, another thought flickers through your mind. What happened when the animals and herbs failed, when infections spread beyond reach, and the patient's pain became too much to bear? In those moments, the prehistoric dentist didn't reach for a cure. They reached for ceremony. The next treatment wasn't medical at all. It was spiritual, performed not with tools, but with song, smoke, and a desperate hope that the gods were still listening. The smoke from the fire thickens as night settles around you. The smell of animal fat and herbs still clings to your hands, but the patient beside you has finally gone still. The swelling is gone, the jaw no longer trembles, and everyone watching believes your mixture of bone ash and beeswax has saved another life. In truth, the patient is dead, and by sunrise the tribe will be asking which spirit you angered this time. For all the practical efforts of prehistoric dentistry, belief ruled the mouth as much as biology did. Before germs, before science, before anyone thought to wash their hands, pain was something personal, a punishment, a curse, or a test. Teeth were sacred, mysterious little stones that grew from flesh, fell out, and then came back again, defying logic. To the ancient mind, that made them magical, and with magic came superstition. Archaeologists have found evidence of early humans keeping teeth as talismans, sometimes their own, sometimes from animals or even other people. Burials dating back over 20,000 years show necklaces and bracelets strung with teeth, worn as protection against disease. The idea was simple. If teeth could survive death and decay, Perhaps they carried a piece of immortality. Wearing them might keep you alive a little longer, or keep evil spirits from gnawing on your soul. It was dental jewellery with serious religious overtones. The symbolism stuck. Across cultures and millennia, teeth became a kind of spiritual currency. In ancient Siberia, shamans used human teeth in rituals to summon ancestral protection. Among certain tribes in Africa and Australia, a child's first lost tooth was buried or hidden in a sacred spot to prevent it from being stolen by spirits or enemies. Even in medieval Europe, people believed that throwing a tooth into a fire would prevent a witch from gaining power over you. In a strange way, the tooth fairy is just a sanitized version of the same idea, a lingering echo of ancient protection magic disguised as bedtime comfort. But prehistoric superstition didn't stop at wearing teeth. Some believed that pain itself had to be lured out of the body. In the earliest forms of ritual healing, the prehistoric dentist wasn't a doctor at all, but a kind of priest. They performed ceremonies designed to convince the pain to leave. Sometimes they burned herbs, sometimes they sang, and sometimes they made small carvings of teeth from bone or wood, offering them to the spirits as a trade. The ritual was called sympathetic magic, the belief that one thing could influence another through imitation. If you carved a new tooth and placed it in front of a fire, maybe the old, painful one would be drawn out by its reflection. This idea lasted astonishingly long. Thousands of years later, Babylonian clay tablets still describe incantations for tooth pain. One famous spell tells the story of a worm born from the mud of creation who begged the gods for food. They told it to feed on figs and roots, but the worm asked instead for the blood of the tooth and the marrow of the gum. The solution, according to the text, was to recite a prayer while rubbing crushed herbs on the tooth to banish the worm. It's half myth, half medical prescription, and it reveals something beautiful about early humanity, the urge to understand suffering through storytelling. Egyptian texts take it a step further. They recorded prayers to the goddess Isis for relief from mouth pain, often combined with instructions for applying honey or herbs. It's one of the earliest examples of religion and medicine working hand in hand. To treat a patient, you didn't just use ingredients, you used belief. The same hands that mixed the salve also traced protective symbols in the air. The treatment wasn't just physical, it was cosmic. Even prehistoric burials show traces of dental reverence. In one Neolithic grave in Italy, a young man was buried with an animal tooth inserted into his jaw, likely during life. Whether it was a primitive implant or a ritual act, the implication is clear. Teeth weren't just body parts, they were relics, worthy of replacement even in death. In other graves, missing teeth were replaced with carved stones or shells before burial, ensuring the dead entered the next world with a complete set. You can almost hear the reasoning. If you can't chew in the afterlife, you'll starve. Superstition also guided who could perform dental work. The prehistoric healer wasn't always chosen for skill. Sometimes they were chosen by birthright or omen. If lightning struck near a person, or if they dreamed of teeth falling out, they might be designated the tribe's next toothkeeper. Their tools became sacred objects, stored in bundles of bone and hide, only touched during ritual. Archaeologists studying early healer burials have found small caches of flint blades and tooth drills arranged with ceremonial precision, as though the tools themselves held power. To touch them carelessly would be to invite sickness. The link between teeth and the supernatural persisted into written history. In ancient China, losing a tooth was seen as an omen, a sign of family conflict or impending misfortune. In Greek philosophy, Aristotle mused about teeth falling out as a form of divine warning. Even the Romans, ever practical, had rituals for tooth pain. A sufferer would spit 3 times into the ground, invoke the name of Apollo, and promise an offering if the pain ceased. If the pain persisted, well, Apollo must have been busy. You can imagine the scene in some prehistoric camp, thousands of years before temples or tablets. A patient writhes in pain, clutching their face. The healer squats beside them, murmuring to unseen forces, tossing powdered herbs into the fire. The air fills with smoke and chanting. The patient's breath slows, their eyes glaze, and perhaps they sleep, soothed by rhythm, suggestion, and exhaustion. To us, it looks like superstition. To them, it was medicine. And to give credit where it's due, belief itself has a measurable effect. Modern studies on placebo show that expectation can trigger real chemical responses in the brain. When early humans performed these rituals, their faith wasn't foolish, it was functional. They were manipulating their own minds to fight pain in the only way they knew how. The prehistoric dentist was also the first psychologist. Even today, traces of those ancient rituals linger in our habits. We touch our faces when anxious, chew pens when nervous, bite our nails when stressed. All behaviours tied to the mouth, the same gateway to survival and expression that our ancestors worshipped. When we smile to reassure or bare our teeth in anger, we're echoing instincts older than civilization itself. You sit by the fire, staring at the pile of bones and herbs, and realise that prehistoric dentistry was never just about fixing teeth. It was about taming the chaos of the human body. Every superstition, every chant, every offering to unseen gods was an attempt to make sense of the mystery of pain. And though the tools have changed, the instinct hasn't. Modern medicine still thrives on ritual. Sterile gloves, surgical lights, the rhythm of reassurance. It's science dressed in the familiar patterns of faith. The wind shifts, carrying sparks into the dark. Somewhere, a figure hums softly, a tune older than language. The patient's pain fades, not through medicine, but belief. And just as the firelight flickers, another thought forms. Maybe superstition wasn't just about curing pain. Maybe it was about preventing it altogether. Because deep in the prehistoric world, dentistry wasn't only a response to suffering. It was a warning system, a ritual of protection, a way to keep the spirits of decay from ever taking hold. The fire burns low again, throwing long shadows across the cave walls where teeth glimmer faintly from strings of twine. Some are human, others animal, and a few are impossible to identify without losing your appetite. You sit among them, sorting each one like a jeweller with gemstones, except yours were pulled with bone tools and unsteady hands. To anyone else, it might look morbid. To you, it's business. Welcome to the first dental economy in human history. Teeth were among the earliest trade goods. Long before coins, people bartered with what they could carry. Shells, stones, and yes, teeth. They were rare, durable, and small enough to store easily. The oldest known examples of teeth used as currency date back over 30,000 years, found in Paleolithic sites across Europe. Some archaeologists believe human teeth themselves were worn as jewellery, not just for ritual, but as proof of trade, something between ornament and receipt. It was the Stone Age equivalent of flashing a gold chain. Even more fascinating is how early humans recognised the value of replacement. Losing a tooth wasn't just painful, it changed how you spoke, ate, and were perceived. In societies where physical strength and appearance signalled survival potential, a full smile mattered. So, when someone lost one, they might trade for a substitute. In one Neolithic site in Pakistan, archaeologists discovered a skeleton with multiple teeth drilled and packed with a mineral compound, possibly to attach replacements. Whoever performed that work wasn't experimenting, they were running a business. As groups began to settle, the role of the healer evolved into a profession. If you were good at pulling teeth without killing someone, you suddenly had something people would trade for. Maybe it was flint, maybe food, or perhaps even a carved bone comb from a neighbouring village. And the better your success rate, the more valuable your services became. In a time when survival hinged on who could do what, a steady hand with a sharp rock could earn you a reputation that lasted generations. By the Bronze Age, the concept of medical specialisation had begun to take shape. In Mesopotamia and Egypt, certain healers were known specifically for their skill with the mouth. The Ebers Papyrus, a medical text from around 1550 BCE, describes tooth pain and gum disease with remedies that sound equal parts brilliant and barbaric. Honey and resin for swelling, malachite and beer for infections, donkey fat for, well, no one is entirely sure, but it made the list. These healers weren't hobbyists. They were professionals, paid in goods, services, or sometimes livestock. The first dental fees were measured not in money, but in goats. As time moved on, trade routes brought new materials and new problems. Harder foods meant more cracks. Sugary fruits meant more decay. And with that came more business for anyone willing to go elbow deep in another person's mouth. By 2000 BCE, the first recorded dental contracts existed in ancient Sumer, specifying payment for tooth extraction services. One fragment even describes a tooth puller who was required to offer compensation if the patient died from the procedure, an early version of malpractice insurance, only with fewer lawyers and more curses. The economy of teeth didn't end with the living, it extended into death. In some prehistoric burial sites, teeth were removed from corpses before burial, likely to be used in charms or traded as material. The dead didn't need them, but the living did. Teeth were durable, easy to clean, and versatile. They could be carved into needles, beads, or tools. Some were even drilled and strung into trade necklaces passed across continents. The idea of a tooth having value didn't vanish with civilization, it just changed form. Fast forward to ancient Rome, where dental commerce became organized chaos. Street barbers doubled as surgeons, and tooth pulling was their main side hustle. These early practitioners were known as dentatores, and they roamed the streets with bags of extracted teeth hanging like trophies. Some sold the teeth back to goldsmiths, who used them for prosthetics. Others kept them as proof of success, or intimidation. The Romans loved efficiency. If your barber could trim your beard and yank a molar in the same visit, you called that a bargain. Even in the ancient world, dental materials became luxury goods. Ivory, bone, and metal were used for replacements among the elite. Archaeologists found a Roman prosthesis with gold wires and animal teeth, believed to have belonged to a wealthy matron. The lower classes, meanwhile, resorted to practical solutions, like plugging cavities with melted pitch or lead, both of which slowly poisoned them. The gap between the rich and poor wasn't just visible in fashion or food, it showed in their smiles. What's truly fascinating is how the trade in teeth never went away. It followed humanity through every era. During the Middle Ages, when superstition ruled medicine, teeth pulled from executed criminals were thought to possess healing power. They were sold in markets, crushed into powder, and consumed as cures for pain or aging. The logic was that a criminal's vitality, stolen at the moment of death, could be transferred to whoever consumed their remains. It was gruesome recycling, but in a world with no anesthetics, desperation made even that sound reasonable. By the time of the Renaissance, the demand for real human teeth had reached an all-time high. Dentistry had become a skilled trade, and false teeth were fashionable among the wealthy, but crafting them required one rare material: actual teeth. Grave robbers and battlefield scavengers supplied them by the thousands. The Battle of Waterloo in 1815 famously created an entire market of Waterloo teeth, pulled from fallen soldiers and sold to dentists across Europe. The irony is that the same object, once buried for spiritual protection, became, centuries later, a commodity for vanity. Yet even in prehistory, the foundations of that trade existed. Humans have always seen the mouth as a reflection of power. The loss of teeth meant aging, weakness, and vulnerability. The ability to replace them, even crudely, meant control over mortality. Every bead carved from bone, every tooth strung into a necklace, was a small declaration of victory against decay. And those who could manage it best, the prehistoric dentists, carvers, and traders, occupied a rare position. Half healer, half merchant, entirely irreplaceable. As the night deepens, the firelight dances over the string of teeth hanging near your bed. They clink softly in the wind like coins, reminders of each life touched and each mouth silenced. In a world without currency, they are your ledger, your proof of value. You can almost imagine the generations that will come after you, refining your craft, turning tooth pulling into art, and finally into science. But for now, the trade is simple. Someone brings you pain, you take it away. In return, you get food, shelter, or another tooth to add to your growing collection. Somewhere between medicine and marketplace, the prehistoric dentist became humanity's first capitalist. And as you lie down beside your trophies, you can't help but wonder how long it will take before people start pulling teeth not for survival, but for profit. Because history shows one unshakable truth. Wherever there's pain, someone will always find a way to sell the cure. And that's it for tonight's trip to the world's most horrifying dental clinic, where anesthesia didn't exist, beeswax was cutting-edge technology, and you could literally pay for healthcare with a goat. If your teeth are still in your head after all that, you're doing better than most of our prehistoric ancestors. Now, if you enjoyed this deep dive into ancient agony, let me know in the comments which historical nightmare you want to experience next. Maybe the world's first brain surgeon, or a lovely evening in a medieval public toilet. And hey, if the sound of human suffering helps you sleep as much as it helps me research, check out my other videos for more relaxing tales of misery, plague, and questionable life choices. Sweet dreams, and remember, somewhere out there, a caveman dentist is still waiting for your 5-star review.